Today, I'm very grateful and thankful that Paul Hawken is joining me as our guest. Paul Hawken starts ecological businesses, writes about nature and commerce, consults with heads of state and CEOs on climate, economic, and ecological regeneration. Many of you may be familiar with Paul through his writings. Growing a Business, The Next Economy, The Ecology of Commerce, Unrest, Drawdown, and Regeneration. Many of them have influenced me through my career, and I'm thrilled to have Paul join us today so that we can talk a little bit about his latest book, Regeneration, his thoughts about climate change and regeneration, and maybe a little bit about some of the projects that he's working on now and maybe upcoming books. But with that said, Paul, welcome and thank you for joining us today. Where are you today? Where are you calling in from?
Michael, thank you. Maya, thank you. It's a pleasure to be almost back in Vermont again, where I spent a lot of time. I am in Mallorca, in the Balearic Islands of Spain, in Arta, which is a town far from Palma, and in the canyon, not far from the sea. And Menorca is I don't even know what direction it is, but it's that way. And across the sea, you go around, you can see it. And I'm here because actually my wife is here, who's Italian, Argentinian, Swiss, and I was in the UK working on regenerative agriculture, converting 1 million farms to regeneration for probably the biggest food and egg and beverage company in the world.
Wow.
Who is absolutely steadfast in their conviction to do that, as opposed to there's a lot of regen egg, blah, blah going on, as you know, and just roll your eyes. And this is not this is the real deal. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, as we go through our conversation today and talk about things, one of the things that our audience, our clients, and our network here in Vermont and across the country are interested in is the concept of regeneration and how to address climate change, certainly within a generation, and how that might relate to aligning their money with that. And their investment dollars, not only their investment dollars, but, and this is what I talk to clients about all the time, but really aligning their values and their money kind of across their lifestyle. So whether it's, agricultural products or do I purchase the organic locally produced chicken or the one that's factory farmed and imported from California, those kinds of decisions, as well as the sort of investment and money decisions too. So we'll circle through those things as we go. And as I was reading through Regeneration, at one point in the book, you talked about the waggle dance and how we do that. And I think of this conversation today, and my role is maybe a little bit of the waggle dance. How can we introduce people to what's going on? What are you doing? And what's going on in the world that can help with this whole idea of regeneration? But let me start by asking kind of the basic question: what is regeneration, and what do you mean by regeneration? A lot of people, it's kind of easy to see the book, and it's attractive and appealing in a lot of ways. It feels to me like the old Whole Earth catalog, but what does it mean? What's the idea? What's going on there?
Well, regeneration is the opposite of degeneration, for example. Yeah. And we live in a degenerative society, degenerative economy. Basically, a degeneration is extraction taking. The watchword and underlying principle of indigenous cultures, some of which have been here for 65,000 years, and that we can trace them, was reciprocity, which is to give more than you take. I mean, it was just like DUH. If you're going to live there for a long time, how do you do so? You actually act as a keystone species. The way you gather your food, the way you share your food, the way you organize your society and your community is such a way that succeeding generations had more and not less. And so regeneration is innate to being a human being. Every 40 trillion of our cells are regenerating right this nanosecond, or we would be having this conversation.
Right.
So we're a walking, talking biological example of regeneration, but so is every other single creature, pollinator, fish, living plant in the world doing the same thing. And that's what cells do. And cells are communities.
Yep.
There's 2 to 5 trillion molecules in a cell. There's 150 billion carbon atoms. I mean, so we are, as a life form, we're extraordinarily and beautifully complex and connected. Yeah. And there's this constant regenerative activity occurring, which gives us eyesight and thought and brains and poetry and song and love and dreams. And that's it all comes from biological regeneration. And so we all grew up, we were all educated, we all came into our own in society that taught us to take. And,
right.
And we didn't see it. And sometimes later we learned, oh yeah, we're externalizing costs. That's the economic term, externalizing costs to some other place, people, river, generation, whatever, and saying, you're not paying full freight. In other words, you're making something and so forth, and you're selling it, you're making a profit, but you haven't paid the full cost of creating it. And so oftentimes full cost or true cost economics has been seen as, well, it's so expensive. The chicken example you gave is like, well, yeah, I can't afford that Vermont, chicken, but I can afford the California chicken, which is, from a CAFO, confined area feeding operation, which is just, and you find people in that, in that dilemma, if you will, a moral dilemma, certainly an economic dilemma. The point I'm trying to make about regeneration, which is that regeneration actually is about abundance. It's about more. It's not about less. It's not about forming. It's not binary, like it is or it isn't. It is innate. And we have, tried to extract our way into well-being and to a wealthy society. We did a really good job on the latter part, but that road ends. Everything that we read, see, hear about climate, about the environment, about oceans, about people, about cultures, about human health, about is saying the same thing, which is, hey, that's the end of the road. You want to keep going there?
Right.
Because it stops. And so rather than, we use the term climate change, but actually, if I can be candid about that, climate is perfect.
Right.
It always will be. It has no volition. So when we say we're going to fight climate change, we've really lost our way. As it's the same kind of thinking that caused the problem, which is we're othering nature as if it was something that we could take, have, manipulate, commoditize in every way we wanted in order to serve our needs. Yeah. And what we're talking about with the regeneration is really a win-win-win economy, not just a win-win economy. And it's got to win for people. And that means, it's got to win for the community. And community includes business, and commerce, for sure. It's got to win for the planet. All three have to win at the same time, or we're not going to be here.
Yes.
So to me, it represents a kind of a real shift. The word sustainability is kind of, it's a shrug, but to me, it's no longer about sustaining the planet. It's about regenerating.
Yes.
What we've lost. We've lost half of all life on this planet, living matter, oceans, land, forests, you name it, in the last 200 years. Half of life is gone. It's not like, we mowed the lawn. It's like we mowed life out. Yeah. And so we're at that incredible threshold point where, we reorient our thinking, our mind, our sense of what is possible. And regeneration to me points to possibility, whereas almost everything we see in terms of the news and so forth points to the probability
Right.
of what's going to happen, and it isn't pretty.
Yes. Thank you. That's really helpful. And thinking, beyond sustainability to regeneration is a beautiful concept, a helpful idea that really helps to frame that up. By the way, as I read through Regeneration, and I really hope people will access the book and use it, and I want to ask you some questions about how you see people using it, or using the Regeneration book and the website as a resource. But I also have to say, wow, Jane Goodall writing the foreword just blows my mind. Thank you for doing that. What an icon, and sort of in a way a spirit guide throughout my life, and certainly a lot of us in our generation. So thank you for connecting her and bringing her to the front of that book. How do you think about people using both the idea of regeneration? I think you helped us frame that up just a minute ago, but the book and the resources that you're making available. So talk a little bit about that. How can people access that? How do you envision people accessing the book and the resources that you're putting out there?
Sure. I mean, Regeneration followed the book Drawdown, and I created Drawdown in 2013, started Drawdown, published in 2017. And that came out of really maybe 12, 13 years of frustration, where I was going to NGOs, big ones, colleges, universities, institutes, and saying, can we map, measure, and model the 100 most substantive solutions to reversing global warming? Can we name the goal? Everybody's talking about net zero or climate neutral or carbon neutral. I'm going, that's not a goal.
Right.
Reversing global warming is the only goal that makes sense for a civilization. And I started that in 2001, and people I spoke to who I respected very, very much said, good idea. We don't do that. We don't know how to do it. And they said, why don't you do it? And I said, because I don't know how to do it either. And so it was really 2013 when I said, well, sometimes you just have to go do something you don't know how to do. I bet half of your listeners, more or less, didn't know how to do the business they're in right now.
Right.
They figured it out, right?
Yeah.
You don't figure it out by thinking about it. You figure it out by just going ahead and doing it, and you make mistakes and you learn and you try to make sure that not too big a mistake, but you learn by error. You don't learn by, and so for Drawdown, I certainly knew, and I put this in big, big, big air quotes, I certainly knew what the top solutions were to reversing global warming, as did my staff. But we were researchers, and I got researchers from all over the world, all 6 continents, 60 postdocs, PhDs, other young people, but work with, and which is why I wrote edited on the book, even though I wrote it, but because they all wrote actually really beautiful papers on specific solutions. And with all that, we map, measured, modeled them on a global level. Okay, and we were shocked by the data, frankly. And it was so interesting because at 2015, when we went to Paris and there was Conference of the Parties, and the famous Paris Accords, which is what the French called in the Paris Agreement, to limit heating to 1.5 C, which means nothing to Americans, interestingly, but it's 2 point. But at that time, my staff was there, and they went on to all sorts of people said, what's the top 5 solutions to reversing global warming?
Right.
No one could name one. There was 30,000 people there.
Wow.
Christiana Figueres couldn't name it. Nobody knew. It sounds like, oh, come on. People say, a lot of people say renewable energy, which is definitely, for sure, no question about it. But that's one. Right. After that, it just fell apart.
Yeah.
And so we published the book in 2017, and I think it made a big difference. But in order to do that book, because I'm getting to regeneration here, I had to stay, when you're a writer, I'll see all these books behind you, you have to stay in your lane as an author. You got to stay in your lane. You can't go, oh, by the way, I wrote a poem last night. Let me share it with you. It's like, no, not interested.
Right.
Your book's on chocolate, whatever. And same thing with drawdown, which is map, measure, model, the most substantive solutions to reversing global warming. Well, the problem with that is there's no such thing as global. So
Right.
the number one solution is refrigerant management. Well, who saw that one coming? Nobody. Like, huh? It's just like, that didn't make any sense at all. Number one, if you don't have refrigeration in Botswana, that is not the number one solution.
Right. Right. Right.
So in a way, it was a tease, and saying, well, this is, if you model them this way, this is how they rank. But the fact of the matter is, they were kind of rootless. They didn't have place. They didn't have community. They didn't have culture. They weren't about social justice. They didn't take into consideration gender and education. And, they just were, we did the math, and okay, good. I'm not putting it down. It's got my name on it. But I knew before we published, before it was done, that the sequel was Regeneration.
Yeah.
Because that has bigger arms, much bigger arms. And it holds the world in a much more holistic way. And regeneration is really not that I say it should be a regenerative culture. I'm not saying anything should be. That's not my job to say should. But I will say that it is about culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not being nice here, but one of the really great things about Vermont is the culture.
Yep.
Let's be honest. Let's be real.
We're lucky.
I spent a lot of time there. So, so culture creates, VBSR. Culture creates not just the acronym and the members, but the specificity of what members are doing, or their and how they do it, and how they relate to each other. It created, real organics came out of.
Right.
So many things are coming out of Vermont, because of its culture. So regeneration is also about culture, but it's really trying to touch into the things that we have in common. It's about, and I said this to you in my email before we spoke, the questions are more important than the supposed answers.
Yes.
What questions are we asking? And are we asking them in a way that we actually listen? And so regeneration is really about recognizing our interconnectedness as human beings, as an easy thing to say, and then to act with respect to that and so forth, as opposed to opposing, to focusing on where there's differences, and where there would be supposed opposition and conflict and so forth, which is what the media in this country loves to do. And not only does it love to do it, but it exacerbates it and amplifies it. And that's the opposite of regeneration. That's degenerate, because what it's doing is trying to get you to click through. And
right.
They do that because the amygdala gets all lit up, and the amygdala is very, very powerful part of the brain.
Yes.
If it didn't work the way it did, we wouldn't be here today. It's
right.
about survival. And so we can thank our ancestors for our amygdalas, but to use that in the news cycle is a way to absolutely destroy a country, and to destroy a real politics, destroy the things that actually make us humane, compassionate, joyful, and I can go on and so forth. And so regeneration is really about, as I say, it's got big arms. It's often used in application, in reference to agriculture, and it's a great way to apply it and to understand it, no question about it. But it really is about the totality of what we've lost and what is there for us to gain, should we start to think about ourselves as being agents of life. That is to say that our goal, I'm here on this planet now to create more life.
Yeah.
For children, for my community, for those who come, who are unborn, for my forest, for the soil, for the creatures that I can't even name, and but they're here and they're working for my microbiome, for the biome in the earth, for the mycelial network, for the 1.1 million different insects and pollinators, the 180,000 different moths and butterflies that actually are the #1 pollinator in the world, by the way. They not bees.
Yep.
Moths are the #1 pollinator. So start to understand where I live and how it works, and then how do I interact with my neighbors, my community, with my all stuff. Regeneration just opens things up when you have that sense of what you're here to be, and we're all here to do the same thing. We really are. And do we get lost? Yes. Have we gotten lost? Very. But that doesn't change, because regeneration is innate to the human heart. And the heart is what? It cares. You see? And care is regeneration. What does care mean? When you care for anything, it's like you want it to live, to survive, to emerge, to grow, to prosper, to, that's care, that's regeneration. So that's what I say. It's really about, regeneration is really about coming home.
It really is. And thank you for capturing so much of that in this book, and thank you for articulating it, because it really is a powerful message about really all of life and everyday activity and everyday decision making, and really across the board, which is so key, and in a weird way, a lot about what I think about the work that I do, that we do with our clients, and walking them through conversations about aligning the decisions they make and their money with their values and the things that are most important, which ultimately is really, I think, about regeneration. So thank you. And I want to remind our guests, our audience, please, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat. This is I think, a unique opportunity to ask Paul some questions and get things out there. So please feel free to enter those questions. Paul, one of the things that you talk about in regeneration in the book is, and one of the things that struck me as you were talking a minute ago is, even though in the broader sense what you're talking about is simple, it's still hard, because we're faced, as with our minds, with so many decisions every day and so much input that things can get very confusing. And you reference one of my favorite books in your towards the end of your book, the Checklist Manifesto, and you frame things up around that idea of a checklist to give people, I think, maybe a framework for how to approach some of these things. Can you talk about that a little bit? Talk about your thinking there.
Yeah, I don't have it committed to memory. My wife was talking to me about it last night, because I'm giving a speech in Monterey. There's a Regeneration Monterey starting, which is bringing in the farmers, the fisher folk, the educators, students, the government people, the county people, the Monterey Institute, the aquarium, all coming together to create Regeneration Monterey, or Regenerative Monterey. And we were talking about last night. She said, "Oh, that checklist is really good." And I said, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that." I don't.
Yeah.
I've never used it in a speech. I said, "Yeah, I think I might use it." If we're going to use it today in this talk, you better restart reading them out one by one. But really, they're binary questions. I say regeneration isn't binary, but regeneration is binary. Either you're creating more life or less life. There's no point where you can stand, look both directions, and say, "I'm thinking about it." And so those questions were I presented to people, and it definitely was inspired by Arthur Gamon's book, the Checklist Manifesto, which I think is a really classic book.
It does, and you give some examples there, which I think are really helpful, and I'll point people to the book, because when faced with what can easily feel really overwhelming, sometimes it does help to sort of boil things down to maybe not binary, but maybe just posing some basic questions. Does Does it support life or not? And some of those basic questions I think I found very, very helpful. We have a question from someone from the Vermont Council on Rural Development. They say, I look forward to reading the book. Paul, have you worked with or come across the work of the Regenesis group? If so, they have these building and growing collectively versus, if so, how can these thinkings build and grow collectively versus separately? That's a good question. They hold a regenerative practitioner series. So have you heard of the Regenesis group?
Oh, yeah. I would say there's about 1,000 regeneration groups in the world, maybe 2,000.
Yeah.
It's one of them. It's one of the early ones. And that it should be 2,000, should be 20,000, because basically it should be co-created and defined by the community within which it emerges, as opposed to, it's not a top-down thing. It's not a list, it's not a checklist, it's not right or wrong, in the sense of somebody can be the arbiter of what is and isn't, it doesn't work anyway. And so I just was with yesterday Daniel Christian Wall, who wrote Designing Regenerative Cultures, and who's probably if there's a Bible on regeneration, Daniel wrote it. Okay. And huge kudos and respect to him. But we were talking about what's going on in Europe in terms of regeneration and so forth, and it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling, and that's why I think regeneration is so important, because I do think it'll be the defining basis of understanding and organizing ourselves, regardless of what level of agency we're talking about, whether it's religion or whether it's the EU, whether it's a business or whether it's a farm, whether it's a school, or whether it's our foreign relationships. I feel like regeneration is going to be defining a method of understanding, because anything less than that means, death. And the reason people, myself included, by the way, are anxious, fearful, or overwhelmed, is because the news is true, and and you can avoid it, which is not such a bad idea, and maybe read it every other day or once a week. But the point being is that the direction of the world is a perfect reflection of who we are and who we become, and I think who we're regretting, what we regret that we have done, But it was based in ignorance, and and aggression and greed. Those are human attributes. But I think what we're seeing with regeneration, rather than just Regenesis, not just, but because they're an early pioneer, but what we're seeing is this understanding just take off all over the world, and being applied specifically in geographical areas. Here's a question, or here's a way of understanding things. Where are you, Michael, for example, but where is anybody? Where are we most effective? We're most effective where we are. That's it.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean thinking small. In other words, like, well, I'm just going to be effective here in my backyard, or just in my, my co-housing group, or what? No, it's what happens is all change comes from one person.
Yes.
And whether it's, you read the story of Gandhi, the book you gave me credit for writing, Unrest. I like the title. Actually, it was called Blessed Unrest.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it gives that background of how Gandhi became Gandhi, how Martin Luther King became Martin Luther King. These things just didn't happen de novo, out of nowhere, like a parachute coming down from the sky. There was people. Henry David Thoreau got arrested because he, objected against the poll tax.
Right.
And he was arrested in Concord and thrown in jail. And his sister brought him hot chocolate and bailed him out the next day. And he wrote this beautiful essay in which he said, when the government is unjust, the just person is in jail. And he was the first person who actually made going to jail a sign of badge of honor. It was shameful until then. Shameful. Yeah. You were arrested. It was like your life was over. And it was Mahatma Gandhi in Johannesburg, and there had been a meeting of the Muslim and the Indian community, the people of color community, because they had passed the Black Act that required them to carry ID, unlike any other white, South African. And they met together in a theater, and they voted together to abstain, that is to object, to, not do it, and Gandhi was this skinny little Indian lawyer. He'd just gotten his solicitor's license, and he knew he would lose his solicitor's license if he did that, he broke the law. And, but it just at that time, and he was somebody from a small newspaper that was talking about this, handed him Thoreau's essay.
Huh. I did not know that.
And when he read the essay, and that was it. I mean, the whole idea of nonviolent resistance, was born then. That term was never used by Henry David Thoreau. No one knows.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. But nevertheless, and he actually held it up as he was taken to jail. He held up the essay.
Wow.
So that's what I'm talking about, from being arrested for not paying 25 cents poll tax. Thoreau just didn't pay it and wrote something, and they read it at the Concord Library or something. He read it to people. So every person can make a difference, but they make a difference by being who they are, where they are,
yes,
and so forth. And so if like Monterey County, for example, what I'm going to talk to them about is, well, look, it's not your job to change Contra Costa or Alameda County. That's their job. But I'll tell you, when you have breakthroughs, you do this, and they're going to be looking over and going, hey, how'd you do that? Or we want to do that, or that's really working, and so forth. So we got to, without forsaking conference of the parties and these large, huge, meetings and international gatherings, that try to change, the direction of the world, which have never worked so far, by the way, but doesn't mean it can't. And so not to to any way downplay that or gainsay it, where the rubber hits the road is in community. And that's where real change has to occur worldwide in order for us to reverse global warming and to create a world that is safe and for ourselves, our children, and for those who follow.
It's true. Thank you. It reminds me of a couple of things. One thing it reminds me of is one of the books on my shelf here. Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, which is also a good read and really follows the same concept, which is really about breathing and being centered and working on our own lives in a way that expands and helps us change the world through our own daily action. But and also makes me think about, you talk about community, Paul, it makes me think about another thing that's happening a lot in Vermont, which is giving circles, and a way of people through community, through small groups, thinking about and taking action on their philanthropy, which is another way of making a difference and doing it through community. And in that way, I think really influences behavior well beyond the giving circle, and is also a regenerative act. You talk about sort of 6 things here, and I want to see if I can reference it because I think it's helpful to sort of frame things up. You talk about frameworks, equity, reduce, protect, sequester, influence, and support, which are interesting frameworks, I think, for thinking about activities and thinking about how to approach some of these things. Anything to add to that when you think about kind of those frameworks? You may
Well,
not.
it always begins with self, and
Yeah.
and I don't mean to be a Zen or sort of belly button focused,
Right.
because one of the ways that one of the things that's made people feel like hopeless is like, what can you do? Like that question, like Uncle Sam, what can you do?
Right.
Recycle and don't buy too many clothes and eat organic food. And then you do those things and you go, that's not sufficient to the task at hand.
Right.
You know it, and you're going,
Right.
I'll do it, but I'll pick up the paper the next day or listen to something or watch something and going, oh my God, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, and so you
Yeah.
feel that. So that creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of hopelessness, and understandably. So it's really important that it's like things start with the individual, but they don't end there. If they end there, then that's sort of narcissism, frankly. And that's why I emphasize community, because there's no such thing as an individual. The only time an individual exists is in Western movies and comic books. We are inextricably connected to each other in ways that are just extraordinary, magical, mystical, practical, pragmatic, and real. And when we experience that, when we feel that, and you experience it more in Vermont, by the way, I'll tell you a hell of a lot more than you do in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah.
And it's palpable. And things really, you create a generative matrix in which change can happen, can occur, on education level, on a political level, on an economic level, and a compassionate level, and so many other ways in which you can create change and create a Bernie Sanders that way, in where you couldn't, in a different context. So I just feel like, that I say things start with one person, but if they end with one person, then that's the monk in the cave, which is fine. But given in a world that's on fire, probably not what is called for at this moment. Unless that's your calling. If you're calling, then God bless, and everything. Yeah. But right now, we need to figure out how to come together and not come apart, and not to separate, and not to and so I don't have the answers to that. By the way, I see it and admire it where I do see it, and that's what I was saying earlier about the question about regenesis. I mean, one of the things that we're going to do in the website, regeneration.org, two things. One is Nexus, which is already there, and that's solutions by agency. In other words, this is what you can do as an individual. This is what you can do as a neighborhood, as a community, as a co-op, as a college, as a county, or as a province, as a state, as a company, as a corporation, rather than this is what you can do. Yes. And, if you hear about the boreal forest and you go, oh my God, the biggest stock of carbon on Earth, and it's burning up and disappearing. And, then here's the things you can do for real, you as an individual. But there's a lot more you can do. And so you choose that level of agency, because we all have levels of agency that we just take for granted, in our work, in our workplace, in all sorts of systems that we function within as parents, as grandparents, as students, as employees, as professionals, as people who are politically involved with our community, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what Nexus is about. The Nexus is going to be completed fairly soon, and then goes into Creative Commons, which means take it and you can change it to your language, change it to your state, so that things are specific, more specific to Vermonters, like there's Vermont Nexus,
Yep.
And we will keep correcting and improving ours, on our website, and we'll make anybody else who uses it aware of our corrections, but we'll have no control over your use of Nexus.
Interesting.
And there'll be things you drop and go like, well, then you apply to Vermont. Sorry. But this does, and we're going to add it and so forth. But we're going to do that all over the world and different languages, so that, already it's Australia and other countries. And so that's really important. The second thing we're going to do with Waggle, you mentioned, but Waggle comes out every week, it's just, but we're going to make that so that the hundreds and thousands of organizations that are involved with regeneration can toss in articles. And so you can look at it, headline, read more, open it up, and there it is, in Western Australia, and it's AJ, and he's doing regeneration, and what's that? He's doing that.
Yeah.
And you read about it, you go there, boom, you're there, you're in his website or his domain, Anthony James, or wherever. And so that it's more like a toroid, it's regenerative self. So it doesn't go back to us. We're trying to create something where the world can find itself in terms of regeneration, and have a search function. So you say, who's doing regenerative tea in Sri Lanka?
Yeah.
How would you find out? You can Google it, of course, but it comes up. But you'll be able to connect to your compadres, to your brothers and sisters, who have the same concerns. They may not even use the word regeneration. Who cares about that?
Right.
It matters what you do, it's in your heart, not terminology. But so that world can connect to itself. And so that's the second thing we're going to do. And then we're going to do a field guide to regeneration, which is, written by a bunch of really amazing people. Daniel Christian Wall is one of them, by the way, I mentioned, but Stefano Boeri in Italy, and Damon Gameau, and Anna Paulina in Australia, and who really are doing it and understand how to do it in their experience and suggestions. Charlie Massey, Isabella Tree at the NEP Estate in the UK. And just be fascinating, but also, I think, stimulating and helpful. Say, oh my God, look what they did, and I said, we could do that, or we could do something like that, or, and so that will come out as well. And then we're doing the book you have, we're doing 2.0, which is a bunch,
nice.
A bunch of changes. Yeah. So those are all coming out of regeneration.org soon. Or not
awesome. Soon. Thank you. That's helpful. I noticed you did call out a handful of Vermont connections in regeneration, and I feel so. It's nice to know the connection between that Footprint Farm and Dave Chapman and others are getting some recognition there for the amazing work that they're doing here in Vermont. Yeah.
Yeah, Lindley and Dave are just astonishing. Yeah.
Yeah. We got a question from the audience, and I think you mentioned the author a minute ago, Daniel Chapman. What was the last name? Daniel
Christian Wall, WAHL.
And you said, I think you referenced, you said he has the Bible of regeneration. Is that the author
that's a compliment to Daniel. It's called Designing Regenerative Cultures.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah. And he makes a very important point, though. Recently he said, I'm not telling you to make a regenerative culture. I'm not. He said, I'm showing you that it's innate. Same thing. He didn't use the word innate, but so forth. It's an emergent quality. And then you say, well, what is it? Well, it's a regenerative culture. But it's not like, here's the how to, step 1, step 2, step 3. You can't create a culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm again going to encourage people. We've got another 10 or 12 minutes or so. So encourage people to ask questions. Again, I'll ask a question that's a little. It's practical. I hear it a lot of times from clients who are, we're having conversations about, purchasing a new car, and they're thinking about, their first electric vehicle. And part of the conversation sometimes comes around to, well, gee, a lot goes into the steel and the elements and the batteries. And if I buy an electric, am I really doing any good with, an electric vehicle replacing my, why don't I just keep my fossil fuel vehicle and run it until it dies? And, those kinds of conversations, again, are kind of tough. They're sort of, and they're very confusing. What are your
I
thoughts
think
about that?
great conversations. I think they're great questions. I praise them. First of all, I have a 13-year-old car. It's a hybrid. Bill Ford gave it to me, and I'll be damned if I'm going to buy an EV. I only drive 4,000 miles a year, or less. But the most ecological thing I can do, the smallest footprint I can have, is to keep that car. And I do really good repair and drive it as little as possible. And that's it. And to buy a Tesla, you can get Tesla for $26,000 in California right now. With the government thing, you think it's the cheapest car there is, but no way, Jose. I mean, it's not like I want to. Oh, Paul, you should be driving an EV. No. So someday. But first of all, there's too many cars. So let's just talk about that.
Right.
And the fact is that a Tesla 3 weighs 6,000 pounds. Well, gee, so does a pickup truck. Like a Ford 250. I mean, because of the batteries. The batteries themselves and so forth. So here's what I think. One is, if you need a car, better buy a used car that gets really good mileage. So far as right now, that's my opinion. I know it's kind of controversial, but because it's cars there already, and the steel is there. It's already been, had its impact on the world, so it's not having new impact. If you drive a lot, then I think, maybe EV is a better way to go, because of the number of emissions, so the mileage, Several things are happening though. One is there's really some interesting battery technologies afoot. Now, will it be available in 5, 6, 7 years? Maybe, maybe not. 10 years? Absolutely, no question about it. And that don't rely on, rare earths in the Congo and the Atacama Desert for lithium, and, or seabed mining. How about that one,
Right.
for EVs? It's such a mind-bending concept to destroy the oceans so that you can drive a Tesla, There's people, there's a group called Better Batteries, getting companies to commit to not using seabed minerals or cars already. That's there. But there's also some things happening in terms of materials. And I think the way when we talk about solutions, we often think about decarbonization, and that's good. I mean, we have $101 GDP, world GDP, 101 trillion.
Yeah.
Every single thing on it is going to be decarbonized. Every car, every ship, every bus, every truck, every rail car, every home, every building, it's all, steel plant, all being decarbonized, and all the matter, materials, corn, soy, wheat, food, I mean, everything there is now being addressed by companies, entrepreneurs, and so forth in some way to, as they say, decarbonize, and that's great. It doesn't mean it creates more life. Mm-hmm. Just removing carbon from a process does not create more life. It's better than it was before. So that's not regeneration per se. And offsets, which you hear about a lot, are like, well, selling nature which is carbon sequestration, selling it to the highest bidder is what got us in this situation. And we used to sell people and elephant tusks too. And how did that work out? I mean, it's So the idea that we can buy offsets, you plant trees over there, I'm going to emit over there, is also kind of a bizarre mentality, in my opinion.
Really bizarre.
Really bizarre. Now, there is a thing called onsets, which is in regeneration, which is, to find places to put money that do, in fact, restore, protect forests and peoples and cultures and so forth, but not because you're making up for something you did over here. Just give them the damn money. Support it. I mean, excuse me for my French, but it's like, come on, But this is what we should be doing, particularly in the global South, which has paid the highest price for colonialism and for extraction, But there's a company called Inventwood, and I wish I had samples here. I don't in the home, and this is Lingbing who is a Chinese scientist. He was a gifted child in China, recognized, which they do in China, and then, and then his schooling was amplified. He graduated from college when he was 18. He got his PhD at UCLA in nanotechnology when he was 20. Then he did his postdoc at Stanford. He's just the most beautiful mind in person. I mean, just it's like, he reminds me of Buckminster Fuller. He's got this really unique way of seeing the world. Well, one of the things he discovered as a physicist, and he says, the thing about physics is that it goes to any scale, the universe, or down to, the particle zoo in time, in atoms, of leptons and muons, and all the, and physicists embrace it all. He noticed when he's at University of Maryland now. He noticed when he looked at cellulose, which is common to all plants and trees and everything and so forth, that it's organized the same way under electron microscope. You can just look at one cellulose fiber is organized just like a nanotube, just like nanotechnology.
Yeah.
Spiralic, it grows up. Of course, it grows this way. Of course, makes sense. Stronger. And hydrogen bonds, different than nanotechnology, but hydrogen bonds. So he started experimenting, and the way each of us can understand the strength of cellulose is take a piece of, typewriter paper, just 8.5 by 11, and just tear it in half. Easy, right?
Yeah.
Now, same piece of paper at the ends and try to pull it apart. You can't.
Right.
That's the strength of, that he could see, and why it is so strong. Why is it so strong? Okay, so he spent 7 years, and then and what he does, he can take timber bamboo or softwood, and then he boils it with sodium hydrochloride and sulfur chloride, another one, 2 chemicals, common, and then boils it again, boils those chemicals out, and then he compresses it in at 100 C, and from 6x compression. So he's created space in the wood, in the cellulose, and then he's compressed it. Okay, a piece of wood is 2+ times stronger than steel.
Yeah. Wow.
It is 1/6 the weight. It is
Wow.
one half the cost. It virtually doesn't burn.
Wow.
It sequesters carbon. You can build I-beams out of it. You replace steel and concrete.
Wow.
Right? Steel is 8-9, depending on who you talk to, % of emissions. Concrete's another 6 to 7%. We're running out of sand because of concrete, in the world.
Yeah.
And that's Inventwood. You can go on inventwood.com. You can go look at it. All the data are there. But the U.S. government is what supported Lingbing and for 10 years. And Department of Energy gave the first $25 million to build a factory in North Carolina. So, our government does some things that are really broke, which we don't see, when we watch Congress. Yeah. And so, but Well, I mention it because, you know, you could build a Tesla out of it. You can build a 787 Dreamliner. It'd be safer, lighter,
Yep.
better.
Yep.
You know? And you can mold it, you know, all these things. But I think we're at, and I can give you other examples, Michael, but I'm just saying we could look at the biological world, the living world, and look at it in new ways that aren't just about protecting, saving, nurturing, which all we should do, of course, you know, restoring, renewing, revitalizing, certainly regenerating. But there are ways to look at it that, like the Bing did, which are like, what if?
Yes.
And there's what ifs. And what's so beautiful about science right now, to me, because I've just finished a book called Carbon, the Book of Life. And what's so beautiful about science is full of science, but in not scientism, science. But it's like the beauty of science right now. We're at this era where we're discovering more and more of what we don't know. I suppose we know.
Yeah.
Western empirical deterministic science, which brought us to this point in time, which didn't really is not where we want to be. Yeah, I probably got on too long, I know, but I just want to share that, you know, that there's things happening there. That was a car, by the way, what Bing is creating now. And if you didn't see the factory, you didn't see Bentwood, if you weren't, you know, you wouldn't believe it. He's making a wooden battery.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. You just answered, we had a question come in from Judy that said, for those who haven't read recent books, it'd be great to hear specific examples or stories of what regeneration looks like. And you just told one. So I think we answered that question. That's fantastic. And Rebecca gives a big thank you. This has been really eye-opening. Thank you both for your work and sharing your knowledge. How can we keep your voice and insights to be heard for generations to come? Would love to know resources to follow these types of conversations and work more. And I think the answer to that might be Nexus and might be Regeneration, the Regeneration website. Any other resources that you would point people to, Paul?
Yeah, well, I have the same question she has, you know, myself, and then no, I do, I really do.
Yeah.
And so in the book, the new book, Carbon, the Book of Life, but and that questions the carbon tunnel syndrome, saying, look, I'm really glad all you, mostly men, all you men are really worried about how much carbon we're putting up there and trying to stop that. And you're going to meet in Dubai with Sultan Al Jaber, who just basically is the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, who is increasing their their oil output from 3 to 6 billion barrels a year in the next 3 years. So thank you. I'm glad he's leading the conference of the parties about
Oh my God.
You know, so it's about the carbon tunnel syndrome. Look at, I hope it all works. I hope that happens. We need it. No question about it. We need to stop, you know, double glazing the planet. But we're missing the big picture, you know, which is that carbon is the flow of life. It's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's not an element. And in that, I'm going to put a whole list of, you know, citations, but just really great writers and authors and people like Meg Chatham and Ed Young. And there's just these beautiful, Monica Galliano, Isabella Tree, who are just writing and doing just the things that just will make you smile and will make you turn the page, put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. We've reached the end of our time. I'm really sad that we have, because I think the conversation could go on for much longer. I was going to ask you some questions about, you know, who do you see as the kind of the next generation of entrepreneurs that kind of fill the shoes of the Gary Hirschbergs and the Will Rapps of the world that I grew up with and knew about, but maybe that's a conversation for another day. And just to honor your time in Spain, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure. Thank our audience for joining us today. We will be this recording will be up on our website in another week or so. And next month, please join me. when I'll be having a conversation with the Vermont Land Trust and how to think about preserving more of our landscape here, and even how to do that through your philanthropy. So thank you again, Paul. It's been a real pleasure, a great pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
And give Maya our thanks too. She's the
Yes, absolutely. Thank